Think about the last time something happened that should have broken you. Not a bad day, something that got all the way down to the root of who you thought you were. And instead of falling apart, you just kept going. You got up, you functioned, you showed people a version of yourself that looked fine. And somewhere underneath all of that, something went very quiet. That's not strength, that's a pattern. And Simba ran it for most of his life. The Lion King isn't a story about courage, it's about what happens when a child decides the truth about who they are is too dangerous to carry, and what it costs to spend years becoming someone else entirely. Let's decode this. Simba doesn't start the story in crisis, he starts in full color. He's a cub, the only son of Mufasa, heir to the Pride Lands, and he knows it. He sings about it. He wakes his father up in the middle of the night because today is the day he gets to see everything the light touches. He's not performing confidence, he is confidence. He's a kid who has never been given a reason to doubt himself. And then, Mufasa dies. He doesn't just die, he dies in a way that Simba will spend the rest of the film carrying as his fault. Scar doesn't just arrange the murder, he arranges the story. He looks at a terrified, grieving cub standing over his father's body, and he says, "Run." And then he adds the thing that makes Simba actually go. He says, "What will they think of you?" Run away, Simba. Run away and never return. That's the line everyone remembers, but listen to what Scar says before it. He calls it a shameful secret. He plants the idea that the pride can never know, that the truth itself is the weapon. Simba doesn't run from grief. He runs from identity. He runs because the story Scar handed him, "You killed your father, you are the reason," fit perfectly into the space where a child's self-concept had not yet hardened. A cub who was told he would be king, who believed it completely, just got handed evidence that he is a monster instead. And he believed that too. He runs. He nearly dies in the desert. Timon and Pumbaa find him, take him in, and offer him the only thing available, a completely different life. New name, new place, new rules. Hakuna Matata. No worries, no past. The deal is simple. Don't be who you were, and you can stay. Hakuna Matata. What a wonderful phrase. Hakuna Matata. Ain't no passing craze. And Simba takes it. He takes it completely. He grows up in the jungle as something genuinely warm and funny and present, and almost entirely hollow. Because Hakuna Matata isn't a philosophy. It's an agreement not to look down. There is a concept in psychology called identity foreclosure. It's what happens when a person adopts an identity not because they chose it, but because a crisis forced them into it before they had the tools to process what was happening. You don't become this person, you collapse into them. And the defining feature of foreclosed identity is how rigid it becomes. You can't question it, you can't test it, because if the identity isn't real, then there's nothing underneath. Simba doesn't run from the Pride Lands because he's a coward. He runs because Scar gave him a story at the exact moment he had no other story to hold on to. A king in the making, confronted with proof of his own monstrousness, and the only exit was to stop being Simba entirely. Watch him in the jungle. There's a scene where he, Timon, and Pumbaa lie on their backs and look at the stars. Pumbaa wonders if they're great kings of the past looking down. Simba goes quiet. His face changes. He gets up and walks to the edge of a cliff alone. He didn't leave because he was sad. He left because staying in that conversation meant being Simba again, and Simba is the shameful secret. So he walks away from it, every time, for years. Psychologists call what Simba built a false self. Not a lie exactly, but a version of a person constructed around what's safe rather than what's true. The original self didn't disappear, it just went underground. And the longer it stays down there, the more the false self calcifies. You stop being able to tell which parts are real. By the time Nala finds him, Simba isn't suppressing his identity anymore. He's forgotten it. He argues with her about who he is now. He tells Rafiki he's not the king. Simba is gone. He means it. You have forgotten who you are, and so have I. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. The sentence that matters isn't, "You are more than what you have become." It's the first one. You have forgotten who you are. Not lost, not destroyed, forgotten. The original is still in there. It just hasn't been safe to remember. Okay, This is where I stop talking about a lion.
You know what Hakuna Matata looks like in a person. Sometimes it's humor, the one who makes a joke at every serious moment, because staying in it means sitting with something they decided a long time ago was too heavy to carry. Sometimes it's busyness, staying in motion because stillness is where the past catches up. Sometimes it's reinvention, a new city, new job, new name for the same unresolved thing. The pattern isn't the strategy you chose, it's the story you accepted when you were too young, or too hurt, or too blindsided to argue with it. Somebody handed you a version of yourself. You're too much. You're the problem. You're the reason this fell apart. And you took it. Not because it was true, because there was nothing else available in that moment. And then you built a whole life around making sure no one ever got close enough to test it. Here is the part that's hardest to sit with. The false self works. That's the trap. The version of you built for safety actually keeps you close to people. It earns things. It gets you through. So you can't just call it a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was the only available move at the time. The problem isn't that you built it. The problem is that you're still living inside it, and the original has been waiting in the dark for a very long time. Simba didn't need to be convinced he was the rightful king. He needed someone to prove that telling the truth wouldn't destroy everything, that he could say who he actually is and not be exiled all over again. That's what the vision of Mufasa gives him. Not permission to be great, permission to be real. Simba goes back. He confronts Scar. He says out loud in front of everyone what he believed for years, that he killed his father. And Scar smiles, because that's the story he built. And then Simba holds it anyway. He stands in the fire and the smoke and the ruin of the Pride Lands, and he lets the truth be true, and he doesn't run. The pattern breaks not because he became brave. It breaks because he finally decided that who he actually was, the grief, the guilt, the long years of hiding, was survivable, that the people worth staying for could handle the real version. You've been running something, maybe for years, some version of yourself you agreed to become because the alternative felt unsurvivable, and it's kept you functional, it's kept people close, it's done its job. But somewhere under all of it, the original is still waiting, not judging you for how long it took, just waiting to find out if it's safe to come back. The Pride Lands were dying the whole time Simba was in the jungle, not because he was bad, because the right person was in the wrong place. Simba ran to escape what he was told he was. There's a character who never ran at all, who stayed, grounded out, did everything right, and still lost everything. We call him the villain. But the real story is what happens when someone builds their entire identity around a promise someone else made, and the promise turns out to be empty. That one is next.